collects whatever they're sending to you. And I have a wonderful two-act play. The attacker there sends an exploit. The Nepenthes server says, oh, geez, I'm vulnerable to that. Just give me whatever you're sending me, whatever. And it sends its evil bits of code to compromise your computer, and then it promptly stops and captures it and seals it all up for a nice little box for you to look at later.
Quick question. You say Linux all the time. What about Solaris? Is that involved too?
You can, well, we can get into that on HoneyD. Solaris, I've never actually used in a honeypot environment, but with a high interaction honeypot, you want to run Solaris, you want to run HPUX, you want to run, Windows 3.1, anything. Oh, yeah. With a high interaction honeypot, you can choose whatever operating system you did. I choose Windows and Linux because they're the most commonly exploited ones out there. Occasionally, when you're going through your snort logs, you'll see, either a sadmin-d or what's the other one they always toss out? The Solaris telnet exploit. Very rarely do you see stuff that's specifically tailored to Solaris, but if you want to toss an old Solaris box out there and really make them wonder what the heck's going on, go right ahead. And so we have Dudley Do-Right, who has captured the evil Trojan, and the attacker is saying curses. Nepenthes pros, it can be used on any existing server. So for example, if you have on your home DS broadband connection a web server that you're using to share photos, or an FTP server that you're sharing with friends, you can disable those modules so that Nepenthes won't listen on those ports and run on everything else. And you will be able to collect exploits and do whatever you want with them and still run your home server. Again, this goes back to that whole, are you comfortable with this running on your home server? Because as with any program, as on the last point, since it's listening on a port, it can get compromised. I don't think I've ever actually seen a security bug with Nepenthes, but I'm sure they exist. There was actually something that they were talking about on their weblog where the botnet herders were getting wise, and what Nepenthes will do is say, for example, I'm compromised and I'm sitting behind my NAT firewall, and I have a 192.168 address, and my compromised computer is saying, oh, I'm scanning everybody, but when they say, okay, grab my file via TFTP, I'm on 192.168, Nepenthes is smart enough to actually say, okay, let me go try with the IP address it connected me to, and maybe we'll get lucky. What the botnet herders were doing was sending with a 192.168 address and seeing if anyone connected back to them when they were doing their scans, and making more or less a real-time black hole list of the Nepenthes nodes. So they changed the default configuration to not do that. The pros with Nepenthes is that if you ever want to collect Windows exploits, Nepenthes is your program. It will do all kinds of wonderful, Sasser, Blaster, it keeps track of Slammer, and there's like a giant list of exploits or automatic virus exploits that it will try to connect and allow you to monitor. The cons with Nepenthes is that it's somewhat difficult to set up. You want to run it on a binary if you have the chance, because compiling it from scratch is rather difficult. Like, I almost pulled my hair out, and I consider myself fairly okay in setting up software. Its knowledge of exploits is kind of limited. Like, for example, I was actually running it, this happened a couple of months ago, where there was something running rampant on the network. We didn't know what exactly it was. It was connecting to our Nepenthes box, and it was saying, unknown exploit, I'm not going to do anything. So, which is really annoying when you're trying to figure out exactly what the hell's going on. Logging is a bear. The logs are horrid in it. It's not going to tell you exactly what's going on, and actually trying to configure it to do verbose logging is very painful in itself. You can tell that it was done more or less as a hack, where it's sort of like, oh shoot, we should really log this. Like I said, since it's listening on a port, it can get compromised. Honeytrap, what it is sort of like Nepenthes diet. It basically listens for any type of connection to any port on the system, and then it opens up, oh, I'm listening on that port, please send me whatever you're trying to send me. It also, it's Windows, Linux, it doesn't really matter. It can be installed on existing machines, much like Nepenthes, and this is very much a homeless man's honeypot, which is even below poor man. How Honeytrap works, you send your exploit and it goes, oh, no. That's all it does. It just, whatever this, packet is, it just sits there and goes, yeah, keep on sending it. I'm cool. Honeytrap is that it's dead simple. It's very easy. It's very easy to set up. It's kind of, I wouldn't say very easy. It's easier to set up than Nepenthes. Very limited interactivity. I think there's a couple of things out there where people are actually trying to make it run scripts and actually say, oh, okay, this is, you connected me on port 21. I'm an FTP server. Please give me your username and password. But as for Nepenthes, it does a very good job. It does a very good job running on CIFS and Samba and Windows file sharings. Honeytrap doesn't do that. And technically, Honeyd doesn't do it either. Which is, Honeytrap does keep logs, which are slightly better than Nepenthes, but that's sort of like being the tallest midget. Honeyd. Hey, I'm just saying like it is. Honeyd. Honeyd was developed by Niels Provost, who now works for Google, so he's really smart. Emulates, it's a really nice program. It emulates hosts on a network that either run programs or scripts specified in the configuration file. If you have, a /24 sitting around on your network, which I'm sure you all do, you can tell it, Honeyd, listen for every type of connection to this Class C network that I'm going to give you, and you have to, do some ARP issues if you're on Ethernet. Listen for anything, and here's a bunch of addresses. You're running a web server on this port. You're running a Windows box on this port, running an IDS emulator, and you can have it configured down. When I first ran into this, I was on a capture the flag contest, and we had a Class C network that we could hack around on where everyone else was sitting. So there were 8 boxes, and I said, okay, well, how can I actually make this very annoying for everyone else? So I started up Honeyd, and I had it listen on every other possible IP address space. So 8 boxes suddenly blossomed into 253. I wasn't very popular that weekend. It's got a very good amount of IP trickery. Like, for example, Class Cs are just the beginning of it. I've heard people running, more or less entire, you can say, okay, here's your Class C, okay, but you're also connected to this Class C over there. But if when you're responding on it, emulate yourself over a 64 kilobit link, and it'll do it. And you can say, okay, this link that you're entering, this Class C, when you respond to it, pretend you have a very latent connection, like, 100 millisecond ping, is nothing. You want to do it like, 1,000 milliseconds. And it does a very good job trying to convince people that, I'm an actual, in reality, you're a Linux box running on some type of IP, but, you'll respond back, oh, I'm Solaris. And, it'll completely fool Nmap, because what Honeyd does is take Nmap's, I don't know what exactly they call it, the file that they use to determine whether or not what operating system you're on, the fingerprinting system, thank you. And it uses that to spoof its responses back. So, whoops. Anyway, so we have Dudley Do-Right again. What this is the attacker then connects to something called Ghost. I don't know, that's not the official term, that's something I came up with. I don't exactly know what they call the spoofed computers. Maybe they just call them spoofed computers for all I know. The attacker comes in and connects to one of the ghosts, at which point Honeyd then spoofs a reply back with the IP that the attacker connected to, saying, it says SYN. Okay, I'm this IP, SYNAC. What do you want? Now, the interesting part of this is that with the Honeypot server, or the Honeyd server, you can actually have these ghosts inside of a demilitarized zone, and the Honeyd server can be sitting on your, non-connected to the internet, but listening to that demilitarized zone, so people can't actually attack it. So, while, for example, and actually I think this is covered in the cons, they can attack those Honeypot ghosts, and if they ever crash the Honeyd daemon, all those ghosts will just suddenly disappear. You probably will not get compromised. Probably is not a very good odds in network security, but it's safer than running a Nepenthes, which is actually running a server on a box without a physical hardware. Honeyd services. You can forward back, what you do is when you set up a Honeyd ghost, you say, okay, ghost, you're listening on this IP. You are, running, HPUX 9. You're running a, web server on port 80, you're running a telnet on port 23, you're running an FTP on port 21. What these services, when you're saying you're running FTP web and something, you have to tell it either you want to run a certain script, and there's a bunch of canned scripts out there, we'll get into that later. You can actually also forward these ports back to hosts, hosted somewhere else. These are dangerous because if you're actually running a vulnerable host somewhere else that is actually being used for these Honeyd services, if they exploit that host will get compromised. So you want to make sure that that host is in its little padded cell so it can't get anywhere, except for your Honeyd server. Scripts, I actually started writing something called the Script Kiddie Annoyance Toolkit. It's, IMAP daemon, telnet daemon, I think I did, World Wide Web, and basically all it does is it just logs exactly what it runs, and then it's, returns a spoofed response, which is normally for, like, an Apache server, it says 400 or 404, 400 meaning I have no idea what you're trying to tell me. There's also scripts available on the Honeyd website. There's a nice little program called IAS EMU, which is an IAS emulator. It'll emulate IAS 5, and it's done a really good job. They did a really good job spoofing a default IAS server. Another thing that you can do with Honeyd is you can just set up tar pits where they'll be scanning, and they'll same thing with Libria is that they it sends a synac and then it sets a window size down to 0, where if you're scanning, they're hosed. Honeyd is that it's very lightweight. The pros are that's lightweight. It can emulate very numerous, links, devices, computers. Basically, if Nmap can identify it, Honeyd can more or less spoof it. These ghosts can run everything. You can actually have a, responding back as a Linux box, but you can have all your ports forwarded to a Windows box. Really screw up those people. It's somewhat harder to compromise. Technically, anything that ever interacts with the network can be compromised. Honeyd just gives you a little bit of abstraction there where it's going to be a touch more difficult if you have your firewall rules set up. The cons is that it requires a separate IP for each host. For example, if you're going to try to set this up on your broadband connection and you have a DMZ, but there's a host already in that DMZ, you need to get rid of that host, otherwise Honeyd won't work. Good for monitoring, very bad to try to figure out what they're trying to do with advanced attacks. For example, Honeyd does not do a good job of, there's no way to really script Samba. You just really can't do it because of the way the protocols are set up, and Honeyd wasn't designed for that on the scripting side. You can, forward that to another Samba server, but that gets back to that original point where you want to have that incredibly padded from somewhere else. Now you have all these honeypots set up. You want to monitor them because what happens if you're mucking along when you're not actually looking at them? Bad things. Why are you actually investing your time to do it in the first place? Snort. Snort, enough said. It's, everyone uses it for an IDS. Technically, you can use any IDS. If you have, yourself, a $10,000 IDS sitting underneath your bed, you can use this to monitor your honeypot. For the rest of us, Snort, developed by Marty Roche back in 1998, is a lightweight IDS. Lord knows it isn't that now. It's more or less the gold standard in open source IDS systems. He's made it in his own little company. Everyone seems to be using it. There's a couple of contenders out there that may develop in the next couple of years that may provide competition, but we'll see. Snort, and one of the major complaints that everyone has about it, is that it's signature-based. It's a lot like your antivirus updates. If you're not keeping those signatures up to date, you're not going to be able to catch anything. There's a couple of utilities to monitor Snort. Snort provides this wonderful little alerts file where, if you want to have it up in a console window and tailing it, that's very easy to do. But if you want to try to catch up to it, come back in the morning and you see, oh, hey, I had 200 attacks last night. It's going to be rather difficult to actually see what actually was going on. So they made utilities for it. I'm going to horribly mispronounce this. Squeal? Squeal? I don't know. It's an acronym for something. It's a very nice tickle-based monitor where you feed it an alerts file, and it will then, make it all out to nice parsing, and you can tell exactly what was going on and say, okay, this IP attacked me 1,500 times last night. I should actually look at that. The other one is that came out is Base. There was a wonderful product called ACID, which is the Analysis Console for Intrusion Detection. ACID stopped being worked on about a while ago, very long time. And so what someone did is they saw ACID and they said, oh, wow, this is a really nice program. Too bad it isn't kept up to date. So they decided to keep it up to date themselves, and they came up with Base. ACID, Base. I know. And Base stands for Basic Analysis and Security Engine. You can't tell that was backronymed, can you? Base.securityis.net. Squeal is squeal.sourceforge.net. There's a very lightweight program called SnortSnarf. SnortSnarf, what it does is it takes alert file. It actually isn't it's not under being maintained anymore. But you take an alert file, you read it in the SnortSnarf, or you take a Snort alert file, you read it in the SnortSnarf. It creates all kinds of wonderful beautiful HTML files where you can put it on a static web page and not have to worry about PHP or SQL or just toss it into Internet Explorer if you really want to. It'll work fine.